Greetings, everyone. Hi, welcome. Welcome to today's webinar. Our webinar for today is entitled Remote Learning for Resilient Education Systems. My name is Verna Lalbihari, and I am the Executive Director of the EdTech Hub. I will also be your moderator for today. So welcome to today's session. Today, the EdTech Hub is delighted to host you for a session that will introduce a new set of remote learning resources created by UNICEF and the World Bank in partnership with Cambridge Education. For those of you who may not be familiar with the EdTech Hub is a global research partnership with the goal of empowering people by providing them with the evidence to make good decisions about technology in education. We are particularly excited to host today's session because in creating these resource packs, Cambridge Education, UNICEF, and the World Bank have produced a practical, evidence-based, and user-friendly set of resources that align with our goal of providing decision makers with EdTech information that they need in order to move the needle on student learning. These resources also happen to build on some of the evidence that we at the EdTech Hub have produced. We are excited to bring this group together to share these resources with you today. And I know that my colleagues at the EdTech Hub will be sharing these resources with ministries of education, EdTech implementers, and others that we work with. I strongly encourage you to do the same. Feel free to share these resources widely with your networks. Before we dive in today, I will be remiss if I didn't provide you with some general housekeeping for our time together. We do have the chat function that is open, and I encourage you all to please take a few minutes to introduce yourself. Say hello to your colleagues, tell us your name, your affiliation, and where you're joining us from today. Later on in the session, we will be having a panel discussion along with a Q&A with a few of our panelists. And during that time, I encourage you to use the Q&A function in Zoom to ask any questions that you may have. Our team will be monitoring the Q&A function in Zoom on a regular basis. So without further ado, here's our agenda for today. First, we will hear some opening remarks from UNICEF. Then we will have a short presentation of the remote learning resource packs by Cambridge Education. And following that, we're going to take you on a road trip. We're going to go on a field visit where you will get to see 3 remote learning strategies in action. We will start our trip in Lebanon, where you will hear a little bit about UNICEF and the work with Achilles. We will then make a stop in Kampala, Uganda, where you will hear about how Uganda is supporting early education. And finally, we will stop in Sri Lanka, where you will get to hear from a teacher perspective through a teacher's eyes. We will then have a short panel and hear some closing remarks from the World Bank. So as you can tell, we have less than an hour to cover a lot of information. So without further ado, I'm very excited today to introduce you all to Rob Jenkins. Rob is the Global Director for Education at UNICEF. And Rob will share some opening remarks and reflections with us to kick off. Over to you, Rob.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you, and thanks for this opportunity. I can't really begin without first acknowledging and thanking so much the broad range of partnerships that led to the development and sharing of these resource packs, but also in planning for today's webinar. Let me thank all of you for taking time out of all your busy schedules to participate and to share your experience. Thank you very much to the EdTech Hub, to Cambridge, to our colleagues at the World Bank. Thanks, Jaime, for joining, a dear friend. Thanks also to our colleagues in Lebanon, in Sri Lanka, and in Uganda. Really appreciate you sharing your experiences. And thanks also to my team for all the amazing work they've done in UNICEF Education to bring this all together. So thank you to all. We all know the incredible disruptions that the pandemic has caused on education. Of course, the famous figure of 1.6 billion students being affected at the height of the pandemic. That's over 90% of the global student body. We are really in unprecedented times. Setting up a remote learning opportunities and establishing those and rolling them out at breakneck speed was indeed a priority of all of ours. And I think we have a lot collectively through partnerships with all of you and many others to be proud of, to be happy with, to be reassured by seeing how quick an education system can transition when needed. However, we also recognize the large variations in both the quality, but also the effectiveness of these tools. And indeed, why this resource, one of the many reasons why this resource pack is so, I think, going to be useful is to share those best practices, those lessons learned, so we all benefit from our various experiences and our various perspectives. The resource packs, excuse me, are designed to support government officials and education practitioners in strengthening and implementing effective remote learning opportunities or platforms or engagement to children, and at all ages, actually, primary, secondary, and early learning, as you will see in the pack. You'll also see it, the packs, and you'll hear from our colleagues how the wide range of different technologies are employed, how critically important that is, recognizing each child has its own experience, they have their own experience, their own capacity to engage with remote learning. And so employing the wide range of platforms and tools is critical, whether that be IT-enabled tools, the television, the radio, paper and pens being delivered and linking up through WhatsApps, etc. So a very wide range, and I'm sure you'll all be excited to see such diversity. There are many different case studies from around the world. We're really excited about the ones now that are going to be shared in Lebanon, Uganda, and Sri Lanka. You'll see more in the resource pack, but please also do not hesitate to contact us here at UNICEF, but all the colleagues online to continue to engage as we collectively move forward and continue to learn. I do sincerely believe we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to now transform and reimagine education. And very much at the center of that will be employing technology and new approaches to reaching children and enabling them to reach their full potential, with a laser focus on reducing disparities so that all children can benefit globally. Thank you again to everyone for participating. I look forward to the discussion. Let me pass it back. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Rob, for those opening reflections. A few points that resonated and that I would just like to underscore, perhaps, is the once-in-a-generation opportunity to truly transform education. Wow. Let that sink in for a minute for everyone. So without further ado, I am going to turn things over to Helen. Helen joins us from Malawi, and Helen will now provide us with an overview of the resource packs. Thank you so much for joining us, Helen. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Firma, and hello to everyone who's joining us today for the launch. I was watching the introductions coming up on the chat, and it was just so exciting to see where everybody was calling in from. So welcome and thank you. I'm going to provide a quick introduction to the resource packs. I'll be talking about the purpose of the packs first and how they're structured, and then I'll just conclude by sharing a few reflections that emerged in the course of our work. So I hope you can see the slides. I just had a message to say that they were not visible. I just want to check that everybody can see them. There we go. That's super. Could I just, there we go. Okay, so if we could just move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, the terms of reference that we received for from the World Bank and from UNICEF to develop the packs provided us with a description of what they should do. And I think the key words here are implementation, assessment, scale, quality, development, and humanitarian contexts. And really to say that the COVID pandemic and the subsequent school closures was the trigger for developing the packs, but they are intended to be of value in a wide range of settings now and in the future as we look towards creating resilient education systems and flexible opportunities for learning. Next slide, please. The terms of reference also provided us with advice on, the audience for the packs. And certainly it's a very wide audience, and that was one of the challenges when we were putting the packs together. And the terms of reference also provided us with a focus for the packs in terms of the learners that we needed to be thinking about. And in fact, it's children of all ages, but as you might expect, with a focus on the most marginalized. And then it also provided us with some guidance on the structure of the packs, and UNICEF and the World Bank and the team that prepared the packs were keen to have a similar structure across all of the packs to create connections and continuity. So I hope you'll see that when you look at the packs. The scope for the packs was very broad, which really provided us with a challenge and an opportunity. And if we move to the next slide, the team involved, sorry, if we could go back to the previous slide, thank you. The team involved really had to spend a considerable amount of time before we started writing, thinking about how we were going to incorporate all of the requirements there. And you can see the team here was Cambridge Education, the Open University, AMR Associates, and I'd also like to mention Ensemble Media, which is the organization that helped us to design the packs. And they were certainly instrumental in helping to translate what we wanted to say about remote learning into a set of what we hope are accessible resources. I'd also like to acknowledge the advice that we received from Cambridge Education colleagues working in remote learning programs in several of the countries where we worked, for example, in Uganda, in South Sudan, in Sierra Leone, and in several other countries as well. So that was the team. And as I say, we had to work together to think about what the structure of the packs would be. And these are, if we could have the next slide, please. These are, in fact, the seven packs that we came up with. 5 of the packs are concerned with a particular remote learning modality, so radio, TV, mobile, print, and digital. There's an introductory pack, and there is a pack on formative assessment. And we decided to focus on formative assessment because it's so fundamental to learning and because it appears to be a gap in so many remote learning programs, especially those that were developed in haste to reach children when schools closed during the pandemic, which is understandable, but it is a gap that we felt needed to be addressed. Next slide, please. I hope that you will see in the packs a very strong focus on the learner and the context for their learning. And this is something that we thought about a lot when we were designing the packs and deciding what needed to go into them. Our thinking really was that everything needed to flow from the learner and the context for learning, and also from the learning objective. But a lot of remote learning programs, the good ones really take into account the learner and access to technology, where they are physically located, whether or not they've got people around them to help them learn. And so one of the things that you will see in all of the packs is something that we've called the learner profile. And if we could go to the next slide. this is where we capture that focus, if you like, or we invite the reader to really think hard about who the learner is and, yeah, what is their situation, what is their motivation for learning, yeah, who's with them, and how all of these things will affect choices made about the design and implementation of a remote learning program. So that's one thing that you will see a lot of in the packs, because we felt that it was a really important focus for, especially at the design phase. If we could have the next slide, please. The other thing that we realized when we started writing was that despite the wealth of literature about remote learning, we needed more detail about the processes and the decision-making that was involved in the design and development of some of the remote learning programs that we wanted to reference in the packs. And so we developed a set of case studies, and excerpts from the case studies are included in some, not all of the packs. And we're also hoping that the full case studies will be available soon on the INEE page where the resource packs are being hosted. And I would encourage you to look at those resource packs because they're really interesting. They tell a story about how programs developed. Next slide, please. So with those two things in mind, this is the general structure of the packs. And probably the first thing to say is that I don't think any of them exactly follow this structure, but this is what we worked with. And you will see some you see a combination of these sections in each of the packs. So sorry, if we just go back. The meat, if you like, of the resource packs really focus around section. It is really focused on section 4, which is around access and equity, quality and support, assessment and evaluation. Thank you. Next slide. The other thing that you will see in the packs is that there are places where readers are invited to reflect or to complete a task. And we hope that these will serve as prompts to the readers to think about their own experience of designing and implementing remote learning, or indeed as remote learners themselves. And one of the things that you know, some of us reflected on in the writing process is that we've also joined remote learning programs, and we had experience to share in the writing process. Next slide, please. As Robert said earlier, or suggested, remote learning is a very diverse field, as is illustrated here in these 3 different images. On the left-hand side of the screen, the white shapes that you can see in the tree are speakers through which a lesson is about to be broadcast in a village in Peru. The image in the middle is from Jordan, where a mix of remote learning modalities are used in the Learning Bridges program. And here you can see a young girl using her mobile phone. And then on the right-hand side of the screen is an image of print resources developed by the Fe Alegria program in Venezuela. And these resources have some very interesting tasks for learners to assess their own progress. So I think that was a big, an important reflection for all of us writing the packs that, really this is such a diverse field, and it's likely becoming more and more diverse as more and more people engage with remote learning. Next slide, please. I think some of our other reflections, and there were many, recorded here, are that perhaps in the rush to develop remote learning programs during the pandemic, we lost sight of the fact that learning is a social activity, and the best programs really do take account of that. But remote learning shouldn't ever mean learning alone. That from what we read and heard from people during the preparation of the packs, that doesn't lead to great opportunities for children to progress. Motivation is key. I just mentioned ourselves as remote learners, and anybody who's ever done a remote learning course will know this. It requires great depths or great sort of wells, resources of motivation to keep going and to get to the end. And this is where the role of the teacher or the role of a teacher is incredibly important. Somebody, or perhaps something even, needs to assume that role so that there is a reason for the learner to continue. And that somebody could be a parent, a caregiver, a friend. It could be a phone message, but somebody does need to be there to be interacting with the person that is doing the learning. As has already been. Thank you.
So apologies, if you could wrap up, that would be great.
I will. Some of the best learning programs, the best remote learning programs, as we've already heard, are programs that use lots of different modalities. The other key thing is that remote learning doesn't just happen like that. Learners need to be prepared for remote learning. I think there's a lot of work there that needs to be done. And obviously, we all have a great opportunity with technology, including artificial intelligence, as a way of reaching more and more children and transforming learning for all of us. We are going to be using the packs with teams that we work with implementing remote learning programs, and we hope that you do too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen, for that nice, robust overview. The hardest part of my role as moderator is to close out conversations. I could have listened to you for the entire session, so apologies for that, but we do need to move on. I will say that our colleagues have been posting the links to the remote learning packs in the chat, so absolutely click on them, copy them, make sure that you have easy access to them so that you can peruse them at your leisure post-session. We know that understanding what is effective for remote learning is not enough. The hard part is really putting that into practice. Now we will turn to several examples of remote learning in action in Lebanon, Uganda, and Sri Lanka. First up, we will hear from Dr. Rinwa Itani, who is an education specialist with UNICEF Lebanon. We will start with a short video visit to Mouvement Social with Rinwa, where the partnership with Achilles is supporting children's non-formal education using tablets. And then we will hear from Rinwa, who we're really excited to have here with us today as part of the webinar. If we could cue to the video, please.
Hello, I would like to welcome you to Mouvement Social, one of UNICEF Lebanon's most prominent partners since many years ago. Since 2018, Mouvement Social has been using the Achilles digital language platform in their basic literacy and numeracy non-formal education program, targeting girls and boys aged 8 to 14 years. Here in their center in Jnah, you will be seeing firsthand how they are using the tablets, what they think about it, and what the teachers also think about it. So let's go.
My name is Dhaha Shaban. I live in Lebanon. كتير استفدنا من الأكيليوس لأني كتير تعلمنا له. أكتر شي حبيت الإنجليش والحساب.
نستفاد نتسابق أنا ورفيقي، نجمع نقط من أكتر شي نقطه.
تعلمت منه كتير أشياء مفيدة.
مثلا كان I go to the toilet يعني فيني أروح على الحمام، أو كان I drink فيني أروح أشرب مي.
نحن عم نشتغل مع أولاد خارج النظام المدرسي، أولاد بحياتهم مفايتين مدارس، أولاد ما بيعرفوا يقروا ويكتبوا أبداً. وجود التابلت بين إيديهم ساعدهم كتير، خليهم عم بيشوفوا لهيدا الحرف قدامهم، عم يسمعوا صوته، عم بيكرروا الصوت أكثر من مرة. الولد ما عم ينحرج لما يعيد الصوت مرة واثنين وثلاثة وأربعة ويمكن 20 مرة. خليهم كمان يتحمسوا إنه هن يكونوا عم يقروا أكثر، عم يحفظوا أكثر، عم يتعلموا أكثر.
برنامج أكيليوس كتير سهل علي طريقة التعامل مع الطفل، طريقة كيف يتعلم، كيف يدرس، لأن كله بتلاقي متضمن الألوان، صور، معاني، كلمات. كمان في لعبة بيقدر يلعبها يكتشف هو بذاته المعلومات. يعني بيكون قاعد هو عم بيعلم حاله الولد، أنا ممكن كون عم ساعده مع الأكيليوس لحتى يستفيد وبيعيد أي غلطة عنده ممكن تكون فبيقدر يعيدها. هالشي كتير سهل علي أنا كمعلمة، كأنه حضر درس، أعمل فلاش كاردز، إشي هاي كلها موجودة بالأكيليوس، فهيدي كلها ما بحاجة للإنترنت. هذا الشيء كتير حلو بالبرنامج.
أنا بحب كل الألعاب، كلهم حلوين.
كتير بنبسط بس لأربح وضل كفية لأربح.
أنا أكتر شيء حبيته بالأكيليوس إنه بنتعلم كتير.
Thank you, Verna. Thank you, colleagues and everyone joining us today. I'm Brenwa Aitani. I'm education specialist in UNICEF Lebanon country office. So what you saw in this video really shows a sample of what our children in non-formal education are experiencing and what the Achilles digital language course is offering to these children that are coming from really rough backgrounds. And some of the good lessons of how to ensure digital learning is made relevant for vulnerable children who have experienced exclusion from formal schooling are presented there. So during COVID, Achilles provided vulnerable and marginalized children an opportunity to use digital platform to learn despite the multiple barriers to access that they face. These barriers include lack of connectivity, lack of quality content, affordable devices, and also some social norms that sometimes prevent girls from having access to devices at home. It also provides relevant content that motivates children to learn basic literacy and numeracy in different languages they know are valuable for them now and later in life. Also, the offline capability means adaptive, individualized learning can be offered to every child, no matter where they are, who they are, and where they live. The integrated learning assessment embedded in the games offered there allow the adaptation of content and level based on where children are on their learning journey. Achilles is a tool for individualized learning, but also for collaborative work. As children learn together in small informal groups or learning circles, it also provides a vehicle for interaction with educators and peers. Finally, it supports the learning of children with disabilities. One of the children featured in this video had some learning difficulties and disabilities, but she was extremely excited to use the tablet and play on it and learn while doing so, because it offers varied interactive stimulation possibilities. As an overall reflection, the Achilles platform, as well as other digital learning tools available for children, are essential to support the learning of the most marginalized girls and boys as part of the crisis response to current crises, but also future disruption of learning, which we see could be really happening in the near future, unfortunately. However, some things to keep in mind to support all of this work is that, one, teacher-guided approaches need a cohort of teachers and facilitators, whether in formal or non-formal education settings, who have digital skills and competencies to scaffold children's digital learning. Number two, children's access to devices at home requires affordable solutions and risk mitigations to ensure that devices are not used for other purposes, including selling them. And number three, embedding various accessibility formats will allow to tailor digital solutions for children with disabilities, thus providing equitable access to learning to all children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rinwa. And if you have any questions for Rinwa, please add them to the Q&A function of Zoom. And Rinwa will actually be one of our panelists in a few minutes. So queue up your questions for Rinwa. Next, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Akeem Akunu. Akeem is a school performance improvement lead with the Strengthening Education Systems for Improved Learning. It's a program of Cambridge Education. Akeem is based in Kampala, Uganda, and he's going to talk with us a little bit about the program that targets early grade readers. Over to you, Akeem.
Thank you, Vanna. The remote learning opportunity that I'm going to present just now is an opportunity presented by it's an opportunity that is implemented by a social program in Uganda. Excuse me. Apologies for that. So this brief presentation is on CESU's radio programming work as an example of remote learning and how an agent solution to a crisis can also be one that strengthens the system. Can we move to the next slide, please? When crises strike, the reflex of the education development communities to intervene directly in a way that meets the immediate needs of the children in their locality. While this is a well-intentioned approach, there is a risk that piecemeal approaches can in fact weaken the wider education system by undermining its resilience and capacity to respond to emergencies. A massive disruption such as the COVID-19 pandemic that closed schools of all kinds across the globe can provoke a splintered, localized response when a coordinated national approach would prove more widely beneficial. Next, at CECIL, we have to try to find solutions to the COVID-19 crisis that are both immediate and sustainable. We have worked closely with the government of Uganda to understand its priorities and support its COVID response task force. We saw our
Akeem, are you still
role as injecting a sense of urgency, planning, and adding value within the grid. Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. As a result, we supported the National Curriculum Development Center in its efforts to produce distance learning materials for 5 million children. This contrasted with other members of the education community in Uganda, who presented their own independent materials for endorsement, which distracted the overstretched National Curriculum Development Center from its core work. Embedded within the National Curriculum Development Center team, we started by quality assuring their early grade radio materials, as well as supporting the management of translating radio materials into mother tongue through local language boards. Local authorities were also struggling to develop and broadcast radio programs. We therefore worked closely with the writing team and drew on international best practice to develop radio materials for early grade literacy and numeracy. We also supported the logistics of getting teachers with local and regional radio stations to ensure the airtime. Approximately 500,000 children have been directly reached and over 12,000 broadcasts delivered to date. Next slide, please. Ensuring that the Ministry of Education and Sports can draw on real-time frontline data to inform thinking in an ever-changing context. CECIL conducted weekly surveys of parents, teachers, and officials. The surveys gathered feedback on a range of priority issues identified by the ministry, including access and quality of distance learning materials, prevalence of violence against children in the communities, school reopening plans, and concerns on safety. These were compiled in a weekly dashboard and reviewed by task team members and the National Curriculum Development Center, thus guiding adjustments in plans, adaptation of materials, and improvements in radio program production. These dashboards enabled us to make evidence-based decisions while generating frontline data that allowed the ministry to inform its planning and forward thinking. Again, if the whole education community took a more joined up approach across the country, a more coherent national picture would have been achievable. Next slide, please. Recognizing the limitations of learning through radio alone, CECIL support evolved into a community-led learning initiative, where early grade literacy and numeracy lessons are delivered face-to-face by volunteers to small groups of learners within community settings driven by community champions. Following a successful pilot with demonstrable learning gains and strongly endorsed by the Ministry of Education, who integrated the approach into their school reopening strategy, the community-led learning initiative is now working through local governments and going to scale, with a target of reaching over 360,000 children in 2022. At the same time, CECIL continues to deliver programming for children and parents to support with the recovery from the learning crisis. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Akeem, and apologies for the breaking up. This happens sometimes when we're doing global events. I want to do a quick time check with the team and just double check to see if we're going to move on to the video next.
Verna, let's move to discussion now.
Okay. So for the next part of our segment, we had hoped to share a video with you of a teacher in Sri Lanka, but know that we will make the video available to you so that you can review it at your leisure. In the essence of time, and to make sure that we actually have the opportunity for some rich discourse and get to ask both Akeem and Rinoir some questions, I'd like to now turn over to the questions that have come from you all in the chat. The first question I'm going to turn to Rinoir. I believe there was a question that asked about whether the Achilles platform is available offline.
Thank you, Verna. Yes, indeed. The platform is available offline, and this is something that has been developed based on the need that arose from the implementation in the field. So we realized that in many areas there was no access to internet. So the Achilles team really worked very hard to make sure that even once in a while that the teacher could be uploading any new materials onto the tablet, and then they would be made available to the children offline. They could be working alone, whether in the classroom or at home. Even if they download the app on their mobile phones, they could also be using it offline. And there's another wonderful technology that they used called the MeshNet functionality. So the device of the teacher inside the classroom would be used as a server, so that she could download it on her own tablet, and then the whole classroom will be able to access the updated content.
Thank you so much for that, Rinoir. Akeem, I'm going to turn to you if that's okay. The resource pack highlights the importance of making radio programming fun and engaging. Can you provide us with some examples of how your radio programming engages children and draws them in?
Yeah, thank you, Vanna. Yeah, indeed, we have several ways in which our programs engage children and draw them into the radio lessons. One of ways involving multiple voices or speakers in the lesson, including fellow children, to avoid monotony and to ensure learners can relate with their fellow children. we also use signature tunes, jingles and such sound effects that over time come to be associated with the radio lessons. Lessons are also delivered by actual teachers and not actors teaching. And these are teachers in local schools within the localities where the radios are being listened to, and some children would be able to associate and identify with those teachers. Also, the way we structure our lessons, they're designed so that learners can participate on their own, but also there are prompts or older siblings to attend alongside the children, the target children. We also include, it includes pausing and occasionally to allow for learners to consume the instructions. These are all ways in which the learners get drawn in. It also includes prompts to enable learners cope better with the lesson. Things like, now get your pencils and notebooks out, or are you ready with your notebooks? Are you sitting? Are you observing COVID SOPs, and so on and so forth, those kind of things. And then there are plenty of activities also included for learners to engage in during the lessons. Most importantly, the lessons are delivered in the learners' mother tongues as far as possible in the regions where we work. And we are working across 5 different local languages. And we have also included age-appropriate health and safety messaging. All these are ways in which we draw the children into the lessons and engage them. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Akeem. I will say that, it's something so little but so important, like using real teachers and not actors. Real teachers can relate and be very nimble on the spot. So really, really good strategies you shared there. Rinwa, I'm going to turn to you now, if that's okay. And this is a question, I believe, from our participants. For the case of Lebanon, do you have any example on group dynamics or collaborative learning activities that you can share a little bit more about? Any integrated subjects would be good to learn a little bit more about.
Sure. The dynamics in the classroom were throughout this whole project, which started in 2018. It was co-constructed with the teachers in the field. So different Mouvement Social that you saw in the video is just one of many, more than 10 partners working with UNICEF and using this technology, using the Achilles platform. And sometimes the teachers were able to use the platform as a large group, so using it with everyone in the classroom, or in smaller groups, and have the children rotate while they could be either working with them directly or leaving them to use independently the tablets, while the teacher would be working with other groups of children. Sometimes the children will be working in pairs to compete. If you also remember from the video, there's a beautiful it's a gamified learning application. So the children could compete with each other to score higher. They would compete with themselves. They would have the ability to redo the games over and over so that they can improve their scores. But also, most importantly, that this is a supportive tool that needs the teachers to be able to function properly. The platform is not made to be used independently with the children without the support of the teachers. One of the huge welcome aspects of this technology was that the teachers noticed the children the absenteeism was almost gone completely when they knew that today was the day where they would be using the tablet. So they tried to infuse it at least half an hour every day. They started with using it only half an hour per week, but then because the children were so excited to use it, then they started using it more. The children were more eager to communicate, to speak, because they could hear and in the foreign language in a native tongue, and they were excited to share that learning with their peers and with their teachers. And really the possibilities are endless. Some teachers used prints of the icons that are available in the tablets and use them in the classroom on the board to have the children practice on using them. And then they let the children use them alone in the classroom as they need to. There are a million other examples, but I think we don't have enough time to do that.
Thank you so much, Rinwa. It was great to see the video and then just the kids' faces light up and the level of enthusiasm around, especially the gamification components. I'm going to turn back to you, Akeem, if that's okay. We have a question about the radio lessons and how we monitor the users, and do we keep track of the number of users? So a question in general about monitoring and tracking. For you, Akeem.
Sorry, I have connected. Okay, Vanna, thank you. I must say I lost you a bit there, but I guess the question is about monitoring and tracking. And just to mention that, yes, we do conduct regular surveys of the radio program, mostly targeting parents and government officials, and we do check on accessibility of the radio programs. We do check the extent to which the signal was clear, and all those kind of things. And we also do check to what extent or did the parents, or did they feel that children never talk to them about what lessons and so on and so forth. So yeah, sure, we do check on that, and of course about the coverage. This is also done through the radio themselves, because they do monitor the listenership.
I now have a question that either one of you could respond to, so I'll throw it out, and whoever wants to take it, feel free to do so. For both cases, how was targeting done? How do we ensure equity, making sure that we do no harm? For example, making sure that some children do not feel left out. And this is a question from the audience as well.
I would be happy to answer, if you don't mind, Akeem.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. So targeting the most marginalized out-of-school girls and boys aged 8 to 14 in basic literacy and numeracy non-formal education programming, like we're reaching really the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, and making sure that they do have access to technology that around the world now is as good as print materials. Tablets are not anymore a luxury, although unfortunately many children do not have access to them. But educationally, and this is just a very important tool to support learning, to provide this additional support to the children, and just making them available to these children has made a huge impact. And I see some colleagues in the chat asking about that as well. It's not only in non-formal education, even in formal education, we do have really extremely marginalized children attending public schools and formal education who have access to no technology whatsoever. So just making sure that they do have an experience in using these different through remote learning, whether through the phones or the mobile phones or the tablets and the learning centers, for example, or in the classrooms, has impacted their the quality of their learning, but also their motivation to stay in education. We have witnessed a huge dropout in enrollment in schools over the last year because of the multiple crises that Lebanon has been facing. And now what we're really focusing on is make sure that these children are motivated enough to stay in learning and support their access to foundation literacy and numeracy so that they are able to fulfill their potential in society later on. Thank you.
Werner, if you don't mind, I could add a few from my perspective. So in Uganda, for example, the local governments that we cover as the CECIL program were already selected on the basis of their being marginalized and remote in that sense. So already there is inbuilt in where we are operating that we would, to the extent possible, be trying to reach out to the children who would be most disadvantaged. We also took deliberate efforts to seek out those radio stations that, in terms of their coverage, and as well as their signal, so that during those surveys, when we get feedback that either the radio stations don't reach them or whatever, we lose, and also where the signal will be strong enough for the children to be able to benefit from those programs when they're aired. Of course, Uganda doesn't have an official language, but doesn't have a national language. Extend that we use the local languages of the children in their locations is another way that we ensure that we do reach out to them. But then the other thing also, of course, we took deliberate, or we make deliberate effort to air the lessons, the timing of children and so on, who tend to be very much involved in household chores and so on, would be most likely to have the opportunity to tune in or listening to the lessons. Those are some.
Thank you so much, Akeem. We lost the last part of that, but with that, we're going to have to wrap up the discussion portion of the panel. Thank you so much, both Akeem and Rima, for sharing your thoughts with us, sharing your experiences with remote learning, and joining us today. To close out today's webinar, I'd like to introduce Jaime Saavedra, who's the head of the Education Global Practice at the World Bank. Jaime, thank you so much for joining us and for being here. And over to you for some closing words on remote learning.
Thank you very much, Verna. I just want to double check. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Thank you so much. So look, and thank you very much for this presentation. I really love the possibility to be inside a classroom in Lebanon. So many thanks to Ginwa for that in this context, in which it's more difficult to be visiting schools around the world, although fortunately we're starting doing that again. But so in this couple of minutes, I just want to start first reminding everyone that we're living the worst crisis in the last 100 years. And that's something that we really need to internalize as education community. And actually, it's very important that the overall policy community internalizes that. Actually, we were living our learning crisis even before the pandemic, because there were so many kids who, even if they were in school, were not getting the right, at least the foundation, even the foundational skills. We had this number that 53 children were in learning poverty, that were not able to read and understand a simple text by age 10, even before the pandemic. And now the number can increase dramatically. In the last simulations that we had, is that number could go even up to 70%. Particularly worried about so many countries in which kids have been almost 2 years out of school. And in other countries have been 1 year, and it's been heterogeneous, but you have millions and millions of kids who have been completely disengaged from school for so many months, and unfortunately, even a couple of years in some cases. So we really need to use all the instruments in order to be able to build, I wouldn't say build back better, but build forward better systems. We have a huge challenge now at this moment of making sure that all kids are back to school. And Once they're back to school, something that is not automatic, right? That we need to do a lot in order to make sure that everyone returns to school, and that we reach even all those children who have been disconnected and have been out of the formal system, that they receive the right stimulation. And many of the innovations that we have heard here actually can be extremely useful for that. In that regard, using technology and delivering quality remote learning during, but now after the pandemic, can build resilience in the education systems and can allow for a continuity of the learning process from school to home. I think these examples of using flexibly technology, I think they're extremely useful. But actually, just from this short discussion, we have seen clearly how important is that that we use multimodal strategies, right? That if we use radio, we combine radio with printed materials, we combine radio with interaction with someone. It's clear that it's a clear message that education is at its heart about human connections and relationships, that education is a social endeavor. So we will never replace the magic that happens in that interaction between teachers and students in an in-person environment. However, at the same time, we need to make sure then that that remote, any period that is remote, any remote learning definition never forgets that remote cannot be alone, right, by the person by itself. There has to be always some social interaction, one way or the other. As Helen was saying, someone has to take the role of the teacher, and I think it's absolutely critical that we understand in which way technology can complement that human factor, right? And when we design any type of remote learning activity, we always think about that. And the other thing that I think is important from these examples is it's always the combination of low tech and high tech. It's always the combination between online and offline. So it's always a combination of different modalities, right? So it's always about creativity, and then in that regard, using technology the right way, given the conditions where we are, and it's always using technology to complement that human factor. Let me mention just a couple of things. Verna, before closing. One is that we need to do more in terms not only having a process evaluation in terms of are this any remote learning activity well implemented. That's important, but it's not enough. We always need to keep on checking constantly on how much we're impacting learning. Right? Are kids really learning with these interventions? Are we moving the needle or not? So sometimes we might find that no, we're not, right? That we need to adjust systems so that we adjust the implementation. But we need to always have an obsession, right, of understanding if interventions work in terms of moving the needle of learning. Second, I think a critical challenge for all of us is scale. The challenge that we have is that we need to, in any country, we need to reach thousands or millions of students. Right, so any of the interventions that we're thinking here is that another obsession should be that how we're going to use any of these innovations in order to reach literally everyone, right? And if anyone here is a minister of education or is working in the Ministry of Education, the thinking is, okay, how can I use this in order to reach everyone at scale? Because everyone deserves an education today. That's the problem. That they deserve an education today, not some time moment. Remote learning is here to stay. Technology will always be a great complement of in-person education. But however, we need to have resilient systems and be prepared that sometimes the in-person will not be possible, right? Either because there's another crisis, climate change, disasters, and natural disaster phenomena. Or unfortunately, in many cases that we are living today, conflict or violence might stop children from being able to access in-person, normal or regular in-person instruction. So all these remote learning possibilities have to be there, right, in order to make sure that we continue the learning process, no matter what, to all children all the time. So many thanks for this discussion, Verna, Helen, and also for the presentations of Lebanon and Uganda. And we'll just need to keep on going, understanding better what works, right, and making sure that we are able to reach everyone with the right opportunity. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Jaime. I think you summarized our call really well. I just want to again underscore the sense of urgency that you've expressed through the call to action or the obsessions, right? The emphasis on learning outcomes and moving the needle on student learning should always be front and center in all that we do. And scaling, how do we take these small, innovative programs from the margins to the mainstream? Right, so making sure that there's equitable access to innovation across the board. That said, I want to thank you all for joining us. Recognize that we went a little bit over time, but the conversation was so engaging. At the peak of the webinar, we had well over 200 participants, so thank you all for joining us. Rob, Helen, Rinwa, Akeem, Jaime, thank you so much for taking the time. And again, a huge appreciation to all of you for the good work and the hard work that you do, and for our participants for making the time to make this session a commitment. We hope that you will check out the remote learning resource packs. The links have been shared multiple times in the chat. And please reach out to us. Let us know how you're putting these good remote learning strategies into action and what you're discovering. With that, I'd like to go ahead and close out the webinar. Thank you again for joining us today. Have a good rest of the day, everyone.
Thank you so much, and congratulations.